States, 7 provinces in Canada, and 56 other countries. And the reason I'm privileged is the people like yourselves who come to these meetings. I would say that the vast majority of you who are here tonight have not come here to make money. You've not come here to gain power in any way. You are here because you're concerned about your own health, about your children's health, and the future of your community. And that makes you very special people in the billions of people that inhabit this planet. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you for being who you are. Now, I've been researching this issue for 16 years. I didn't want it. My wife persuaded me to get involved 16 years ago. I told her on the way to the council meeting in Canton, New York, that this was going to be easy. When the council heard what I had to say, there's no way. What I'd read that afternoon, there was no way they were going to continue this. Well, it took us 7.5 years to get out of Canton, New York. This has not been easy. It's extremely difficult. Now, I want to explain these 2 evenings. This evening, I'm going to give you the science. I'm going to, and a little bit of common sense too, but I want to arm you. I want you to feel that if you absorb this information, you are not going to be embarrassed. You're not going to find yourself in a situation where someone says to you, you're talking nonsense. And if they should say that to you, then say, please debate Dr. Connett. He's prepared to come back and debate you. But the second evening, tomorrow evening, if there's a debate, they usually refuse to debate. Very, very rarely do I get a debate with a pro-fluoridation person. I think I've had 6 debates in 16 years. Formal debates with a promoter of fluoridation. So tomorrow is different. Tomorrow I shall be dealing with the spin. And I will be dealing with, in a rational world, what I have to say should persuade the council, your councils of your 4 cities, to stop fluoridation. And as far as the state of Illinois is concerned, to lift mandatory fluoridation. If it was a rational process. If what we were dealing with is people that believed in science, believed in truth, and had some respect for common sense, we would win easily. And this wouldn't be going on after 60 years. No, we are against power. And what will happen, I predict what will happen is, as this issue becomes more prominent in the area, and your councils are forced to act, then you will see an avalanche of local dentists rounded up by the dental associations to intimidate the councils. They will have 20 or 30 dentists there, they'll have the dental students in their uniforms, they'll have pediatricians there, they'll probably have a couple of state officials assuring the council that this is the best thing since sliced bread. If they stop fluoridation, it's going to ruin the health of children for years to come. It's particularly pernicious for poor children. All of this will be there to intimidate these councillors. So we can't beat it with information. I can equip you with information, and you can use it and feel secure using this information. But we have to use a different tactic to get to our councils. And so what I should be doing tomorrow, if we don't have a debate, is to share with you, first of all, analysing the spin, the tactics that they use, the lousy science that they use, and also coming up with a list of questions. A list of questions that the council can ask these white coats. And when the council sees that these white coats cannot answer those questions, really basic questions, it will undermine the authority of the posse of white coats. So that's tomorrow's strategy. I hope you can come to that meeting as well. Well, after 14 years, with 2 other scientists, as Todd mentioned, we published this book, The Case Against Fluoride, and we had hoped, seriously, that this would raise the level of debate. It contains 80 pages of references. Every single argument, every single fact that we produced in that book is documented with the scientific literature. It's understated, not overstated, and we hope that the opponents would respond in kind. But after 2 years, there has been no scientific response to this book. they've used their usual tactic of ignoring anything which doesn't fit into their mantra that fluoridation is safe and effective. But having ignored this book, which is scientific from beginning to end, they still have the audacity to say that the opponents of fluoridation are anti-science, Looney Tunes, and so on. And of course, they continue to refuse to debate. So let me go through the basic arguments. Here's not all the arguments. There are many arguments, but here are 12. Number one, fluoride is not a nutrient. There's not one single biochemical process inside the body that requires fluoride. Nothing. There's nothing going on in our body that needs fluoride. Nothing. Nada. On the other hand, there are many biochemical processes which are harmed by fluoride. It inhibits enzymes, it interferes with hydrogen bonding, it interferes with G proteins. Don't worry about the technical language. It harms. It's a nasty substance. And the first opponents of fluoridation in the US were not the John Birch Society, but were biochemists, particularly biochemists in Wisconsin, who opposed fluoridation because they had used fluoride in their laboratories to inhibit poison enzymes. Two, the level of fluoride added to water, which they like to say is very, very small. They say things like 1 part per million is 1 drop in a bathtub. 1 part per million is 1 cent in $10,000. 1 inch in 16 miles. And all of this is meant to impress the ordinary person that 1 part per million is very small. Well, that is ridiculous. In toxicology, 1 part per million is 1,000,000 times too much if you're talking about dioxin. And 1 part per million is 100 times the safe drinking water standard for arsenic. So whether or not you should shudder or be impressed with a number depends upon what the substance is. Now in this case, we do have a measure of what nature thinks about fluoride. The level of fluoride in mother's milk is about 200 times less than we add to the water. It's 0.004 parts per million. That's the level in mother's milk. Remember what mother's milk is. The baby's first meal, the ideal package, assuming that the mother has a decent diet herself, the ideal package of nutrients that the baby needs for healthy growth. So what does nature know that the American Dental Association does not know? Who knows more about what the baby needs? A bunch of dentists in Chicago? Or nature that experimented with this formula for millions of years before we came along? 3, fluoridation is a very poor medical practice. I am shocked, and I think doctors should be ashamed. Doctors in particular should be ashamed to support water fluoridation. Because once you put medicine in the water, you cannot control the dose. Tell me any other drug, prescription drug, that you can say to people, take as much as you want. It doesn't exist. And more importantly, we cannot control who gets the medicine. So this medicine goes to babies, this medicine goes to children, this medicine goes to elderly people, this medicine goes to sick people, this medicine goes to people with poor kidney function, this medicine goes to people with poor nutrition, this medicine goes to people with borderline iodine deficiency. You can't give any medicine to everybody. Ask your pharmacist if there's any drug where you don't have to worry about dose and you don't have to worry about who it goes to. If that was the case, we wouldn't need doctors. We wouldn't need doctors carefully writing out prescriptions. And incredibly, this is an incredible thing, is the Food and Drug Administration, after 60 years, has never regulated fluoride as a drug, either as a prescription drug or in the water. And its official classification today is that fluoride is an unapproved drug. So here we have an unapproved drug being given to over 200 million Americans every day in their drinking water. It's extraordinary. 4, fluoridation is unethical. It violates the individual's right to informed consent to medication. This is another reason that doctors should be ashamed. Go to the webpage of the American Medical Association and see what they say about informed consent. What they say is when you give a medicine to a patient, you should explain what it's meant for, what it's good for, its benefits, but you should also explain the risks. And after you've done that, the patient should make up their own mind whether they're going to take this or not. Now that's the theory. Of course, in practice, most people will accept what the doctor tells them to do. I do most of the time. However, what we've got in the case of fluoridation with the Quad cities, the councils in your 4 cities here are doing to everyone what a doctor in these 4 cities could do to no one. A doctor could not say, look, here's a glass of water and it has something in here which is good for your teeth. Drink it. And you must drink it before you leave my office. You must drink this. You'd say to that doctor, I hope you'd say to that doctor, drop dead. I'm not going to do it just because you tell me to do it. But that's what we're doing. We're allowing councils staffed by butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers many years ago, not recently, many years ago, with no medical qualifications to prescribe medication for the whole community. The whole thing is utterly preposterous. In fact, it's so preposterous that the average citizen, when presented with this information, has two ways to go. One is to assume that their wonderful government, their wonderful health departments in the federal government, state government, the local health boards are doing something which is preposterous, or the person that's imparting this information is preposterous. Which is it? Am I the one that's preposterous making up this information? Or is it these health bodies that are telling everybody that this is safe and effective, and it doesn't matter that we're violating the individual's right to informed consent to medication? It's ineffective. That was a shock to us who wrote this book. We expected at least the thing worked, that swallowing fluoride actually reduced tooth decay. But what we found is that the evidence that the water fluoridation actually reduces tooth decay is extremely weak. We wrote 3 chapters on that in the book. Chapters 6 through 8 deals with the very weak evidence that swallowing fluoride actually reduces tooth decay. And I'll talk more about that later in my talk. 6, any benefit is topical. Even the promoters of fluoridation now concede, and that includes the Center for Disease Control, concede that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. Well, that was an extraordinary admission. So when you've heard that information, if it works topically, wouldn't the average person say, well, why swallow it then? Why expose the whole body, every tissue in the body, to a known toxic substance if what you're trying to do is to get it on the surface of the tooth? Especially when you've got a substance called fluoridated toothpaste readily available to brush on your teeth and then you spit it out. And not only do you solve the medical risk, which I should talk about later, but you solve the ethical problem as well. Because if you use the approach of brushing it on your teeth, you don't have to force it on people that don't want it. You don't have to violate every day the individual's right to informed consent. This, incidentally, is the wording, and it's important to actually absorb this. This is from the Center for Disease Control, the Oral Health Division. That's the only part of the CDC that actually is involved in fluoridation. They're all dentists, and they promote fluoridation. But this is what they say. Fluoride carries preventive properties initially were attributed to changes in enamel during tooth development. They used to think that you had to give it to the baby, give it to the pregnant woman. That's why pediatricians would give tablets to pregnant women and then give babies drops when they were born. The idea being to build up the fluoride in the enamel so that when the teeth erupted in the oral cavity, the enamel would be strengthened, it would be more resistant to the acid attack the acids made when you break down sugar. And now they're saying, whoops, whoops. We no longer believe that. The fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after the eruption of the teeth into the mouth, and its actions are primarily topical, not systemic. not from the swallowing. So this is what a Nobel Prize winner said about this. He was the guy that led the successful campaign to keep fluoridation out of Sweden. You know, the United States government spent a lot of money trying to persuade European countries to fluoridate. The only country they really succeeded were two. One was England, and the other one was Ireland. Ireland has mandatory fluoridation. Unbelievable. Anyway, in pharmacology, if the effect is local, i.e. topical, it's awkward to use it in any other way than as a local treatment. I mean, this is obvious. You have the teeth there. They're available for you. Why swallow the stuff? Why drink the stuff? Well, he's only a Nobel Prize winner, so what does he know? 7. The chemicals used in fluoridation are not pharmaceutical grade. Many dentists do not believe this. They do not believe this. But they're actually derived from the air pollution control equipment of the phosphate fertilizer industry. Wet scrubbers. A spray of water captures 2 toxic gases and makes a substance called hexafluorosilicic acid. And I can go into that process if you're interested. But one of the important things about this is that in addition to the hexafluorosilicic acid, there are many contaminants, including arsenic. Almost invariably, when you measure the levels of the pollutants in this stuff, there's arsenic. Now, arsenic is a known human carcinogen. It causes cancer in human beings. There's no safe level for a human carcinogen, which means inevitably, by using these industrial-grade chemicals, you are increasing the cancer rates in the United States. This is regardless, incidentally, of whether fluoride causes cancer. If there's arsenic in that stuff, it will increase the population cancer risk. And that's because they are prepared to use this cheap stuff, this industrial-grade stuff, rather than the pharmaceutical grade that we use in dental products. So, 8, our children are being overexposed to fluoride. How do we know that? How do we know that many children in the United States are getting too much fluoride? The answer is simple. 41% of American children aged 12 to 15 have some form of dental fluorosis. That's a mottling, discoloration of the enamel caused by fluoride. Hence the name, dental fluorosis. Poisoning of the teeth by fluoride. It's the first indicator, at least the first visible indicator, that the child has been overexposed to fluoride. Now, when they started fluoridation in 1945, they thought that only 10 or 15% of the children would have dental fluorosis, and that was the trade-off. Very mild dental fluorosis in about 10, 15% of the kids. And now we have 41% of American children aged 12 to 15 with dental fluorosis, and not all in its very mild condition, and I shall show you pictures about this later on in my talk. So, 9. Teeth are not the only tissue impacted by fluoride. In my view, it would be a biochemical miracle if the growing tooth cells were the only developing cells in the baby's body that was impacted by fluoride. We know the mechanisms, more or less, of how the fluoride interferes with the tooth cells to cause dental fluorosis. It's inhibiting enzymes. Are those the only enzymes that are impacted? What about the bones? What about the brain and so on? It was a huge, reckless gamble to take, knowing that fluoride caused dental fluorosis, making the assumption that no other tissues would be impacted. And this again is what Arvid Carlson said in 1978. It turns out to be a very prophetic statement. He says, one wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. That was made in 1978. Part of his case against fluoride in the Swedish campaign. Now, the significance of this is that this man is a neuropharmacologist. Somebody who makes drugs specifically to target the brain to do good things, hopefully do good things in the brain. So his concern about the brain should have been taken very seriously. That was 1978. I'm going to be talking more about the brain later on. There's no adequate margin of safety to protect the whole population. Now, promoters of fluoridation love to talk about high doses, low doses. Every substance is toxic at high doses. Even water is toxic at high doses. Sodium chloride salt is toxic at high doses. And of course, if you have too much fluoride, it's very harmful to you. But the levels we use are so small, etc., etc., etc. Well, the way you quantify this is to calculate the margin of safety. You've got to calculate the doses, or the dose, which causes harm. And then you have to apply a safety factor to make sure that no one gets a dose close to that dose. And if you do that, you will find there's simply no adequate margin of safety to protect the whole population. And notice that I'm talking about the whole population now. I'm talking about vulnerable subsets of the population. Our job, when you put something in the drinking water which goes to everyone, is to protect everyone. It's not good enough to protect the average person. You've got to protect everyone because everybody drinks water. So there's no adequate margin of safety to protect the whole population from known harmful effects of fluoride. So let's clarify a distinction, a very important distinction. There is simply no argument about the fact that fluoride is toxic and that fluoride damages health. Natural fluoride has damaged the health of millions of people in China, in India, parts of Africa, Mexico, which has high natural levels of fluoride. So that we know, that many health effects have been documented. That's not the real issue. The real issue is, does water fluoridation damage people? Drinking fluoridated water at about 1 part per million, does that cause health effects? And they say, no, 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 no. And I say, yes, yes, yes. There's no margin of safety to protect everyone. Remembering you can't control the dose and you can't control who it goes to. All right. I'm going to talk more about fluoride's impact on the brain later. 11. Fluoridation may actually be killing a few men each year. Wow. We may actually be killing a few young men. Some studies have found an association between exposure to fluoride and a frequently fatal bone cancer called osteosarcoma. And I should be talking about that a little bit later in the talk. And then 12. Most countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. Now, you know, right now they're trying to fluoridate Portland, Oregon. And they're telling the people in Portland, Oregon, you're the last big city in the United States which doesn't fluoridate their water. Catch up! Catch up with progress. Catch up with the rest of the cities that fluoridate. But in actual fact, the cities that fluoridate on this planet are in the distinct minority. More than half the people drinking artificially fluoridated water live in North America. 97% of European countries do not fluoridate their water. Here we are. Here are all these countries in Europe that do not fluoridate their water. And some pretty distinguished countries there. They have toxicologists, they have chemists, they have dentists, they have doctors, but they've decided not to fluoridate their water. Some started but stopped. Now, 4 of those countries, Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland, fluoridate their salt. But that does give some opportunity of freedom of choice there. You can choose to use fluoridated salt or not to use fluoridated salt. But the fact is that the majority of the countries in Europe do not fluoridate their water and do not fluoridate their salt. And yet, according to the World Health Organization, data that they published online, the tooth decay in 12-year-olds is coming down as fast in fluoridated as non-fluoridated countries. So here we have on the board 16 countries. 4 of them are fluoridated. One of them, the United Kingdom, has 10% of its population drinking fluoridated water, and all the rest are non-fluoridated. And this is tooth decay in 12-year-olds from the 1960s to the more or less the present, 2003 or 4. And you see that tooth decay is coming down as fast in the non-fluoridated as the fluoridated. You can't tell the difference. And if you look at the rate of the tooth decay in 12-year-olds today, you see it's a wash. You can't tell. So obviously they're doing something to fight tooth decay, which doesn't have fluoride added to the water. Now I would add here, so those are the non-fluoridated. That's the partially fluoridated. Those are the bottom 4 are fluoridated. And the red blocks are the ones which fluoridate their salt. So whether you fluoridate your water, fluoridate your salt, whether you don't fluoridate, there's no difference in tooth decay, according to the World Health Organization. Now, if any of the Quad cities stop fluoridation, they would join an impressive list of cities that do not fluoridate their water. So who do you want to be bracketed with? Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Do you want to be bracketed with Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, San Antonio? These are all fluoridated. But here are the some of the non-fluoridated ones. Amsterdam, Athens, Belgrade, Berlin, Bologna, Bonn, Brussels, Cambridge, Cardiff, Copenhagen, Edinburgh, Florence, Frankfurt, Genoa, The Hague, Helsinki, and so on and so on and so on. Not easy, not difficult to do. You can make your own list. Just go to all the European countries and pull out all their major cities. None of them are fluoridated. So it's ironic that towns like Portland are persuaded to fluoridate, the councillors were persuaded to fluoridate, despite the most of the famous cities in the world don't do it. Now let's talk about fluoride. So I'm now going to go into more details. We've gone through the 12 arguments. Now look at some more details. There have now been over 100 animal experiments which show that fluoride can damage the brain. And some of these studies have been done at very low doses. Again, the promoters like to say, oh, those animal studies are done at very, very high doses. Actually, it's typical. When you're trying in toxicology, typically we do high-dose animal experiments, because if you want to do the low doses, you need thousands and thousands of animals, making the experiments prohibitive. So you jack up the doses to high levels in order to use only a few animals. However, there has been one experiment which used very low doses. Varner and co-workers from the United States included one EPA scientist and scientists at Binghamton University, SUNY Binghamton. They gave rats 1 part per million fluoride in their water. That's the same level that we get. Either as aluminum fluoride or sodium fluoride. For 1 year. And after 1 year, both groups of animals had kidney damage, brain damage, a greater uptake of aluminium into the brain. By the way, it is aluminium. Sodium, potassium, rubidium, francium, magnesium, calcium, strontium, barium, etc., etc., etc. Notice that all EMs, except for aluminum. So what happened here? Answer, Alcoa made a spelling mistake in the early part of the 20th century. They produced about 20,000 pieces of paper with the misspelling aluminum, and it's stuck in America ever since. But if you're feeling really acutely embarrassed by that, I tell you the Brits got something wrong. Just one thing wrong. And that is, we talk about vitamins. And of course you talk about vitamins. And you are right, because vitamin stands for vital amines. So feel good about it. But don't get into the pronunciation of that Dutch artist that cut off his ear, because your pronunciation of that is absolutely abominable. Anyway, back to the subject here. Greater uptake of aluminum into the brain and beta-amyloid deposits, which some people think is associated with Alzheimer's disease. So we might have a situation where fluoride damages the early brain with children and the elderly brain with Alzheimer's disease. No one is following up on this, by the way. No follow-up studies IQ studies. As of January of this year, there have been 36 published studies from China, Iran, India, and Mexico. And the Fluoride Action Network has spent a lot of money getting a lot of these studies translated from the Chinese because the West is completely ignorant about them. But these studies show an association between fairly modest exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. One of the studies which I particularly like is by Zhang and co-workers from 2003, because I was invited by Zhang to go to these villages. Now, one village had less than 0.7 parts per million in its well water, and the other village had between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million in their well water. And that was about the only difference that you could see in the two villages, because this is a remarkable area to do epidemiology, because everything's the same. The same housing, the same lifestyle, the same diet, the same occupations, the same schooling. The only thing that seemed to be different was the level of fluoride in their drinking water. Now, he also controlled for lead and iodine, both of which can interfere with IQ. But he found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range. And you see the shift of the IQ curve over. The dark blue is the low fluoride village, and the mauve dotted line is the high fluoride village. You can see the whole IQ curve is shifted over. We'll see the significance of that shift a little bit later. Now, Zhang estimated that the threshold for lowering IQ was at 1.9 parts per million of fluoride in the water. And this is why I say that offers no adequate margin of safety to protect all of America's children from the large range of doses and the large range of sensitivity expected in the population. And let me illustrate those one at a time. It doesn't protect against the large range of doses. Look at this. A child drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million, which is 1 milligram per liter, would get a higher dose of 2 milligrams per day, 2 liters at 1 milligram per liter, 2 milligrams a day, than one of those Chinese children drinking 1 liter of water at 1.9 parts per million. They would get just 1.9 milligrams per day. Now, one of the things that the promoters of fluoridation have done for over 60 years is, in a self-serving way, confuse concentration with dose. Make a big thing about being able to tightly control the concentration at the waterworks. They could control the concentration at the waterworks most of the time, but they can't control the dose, because you can't control how much water people drink. So just to focus on the concentration, and say, 1.9 parts per million is nearly 3 times 0.7 parts per million, is total toxicological baloney. So that's what they're doing. They look only at concentration. And say, show me the study which has shown damage at the levels at which we fluoridate, Dr. Connett. Well, number one, you're not doing the damn studies at 1 part per million in any fluoridated country. You're not doing the studies. So obviously they're not there. So the next best thing that we can do is to look at the studies that are being done and, as I said, calculate the dose and see if that dose gives us an adequate margin of safety, which in this case it does not. Just on protecting against the range of dosage. Now, the second thing is that normally we want a safety factor of 10 to take into account the full range of sensitivity we can anticipate in a human population to any toxic substance. In other words, in any human population, you're going to have some people who are very, very sensitive to that toxic substance, some people who are very resistant to that toxic substance, and most of us are somewhere in between, an average response. So what we normally do is to apply a safety factor which is called intra-species variation, to take into account intra-species variation, to take into account the variation that you can expect within a species to any toxic substance. That's a factor of 10. It's a standard default factor, a factor of 10, unless you've got other information. Now, in this case, we've got a fairly uniform population. We've got Chinese children, all of the same genetic makeup, etc. And now we've got to say, well, if that harms those Chinese children, what level are we confident which will protect all the children in the United States, where we have a range, different genetics, different lifestyles, different diet, different health status, and so on. And you need a factor of 10. We'll apply a safety factor of 10 to this data, and there's nowhere near. Basically, you have to do a little calculation, because again, this is concentration, not dose. But if we assume that all those Chinese children were drinking 1 liter of water, that means that all those Chinese children were getting 1.9 milligrams per day. Apply the safety factor of 10. That means to protect all America's children from a possible shift in IQ, the lowering of IQ, you don't want those children drinking more than 0.19 milligrams per day. That's less than a glass of water. So if you use standard regulatory risk assessment, fluoridation would have to end tomorrow if you did standard. That's it. Needless to say, we don't have honest people in the water division of the EPA who right now are completely ignoring the IQ studies, not for any legitimate scientific reason. Now, recently, Harvard University team did a meta-analysis of 27 of the studies. Choi and others, I've met them both, and Philip Grandjean, who's very famous as an environmental toxicologist. And in each of these 27 studies, they use the same methodology. They compare the IQs of children living in a high fluoride village with a low fluoride village. The study was published in the Environmental Health Perspectives, which is the leading environmental health journal in the United States, possibly the world, and it's published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the National Institute of Health. So this is being published right under the noses of the people that promote fluoridation. 26 of the 27 studies found a lowered IQ in the high fluoride village compared to the low fluoride village. In 9 of the studies, the high fluoride village had levels of fluoride less than 3.15 parts per million. So again, you can't say that all these studies were done at very high levels. In 19 of the 27 studies, the difference in IQ between the high fluoride village and the low fluoride was statistically significant, and overall, they found an average lowering of IQ of about 7 IQ points, which again was highly significant. Now, the Harvard studies scientists concluded that further investigation of fluoride's lowering of IQ should be a high research priority. And Philip Grandjean had this to say: fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. The effect of each toxicant may seem small, but the combined damage on a population scale, remember, on a population scale, can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is crucial to all of us, both from a social point of view and from an economic point of view. I've added those words. Okay, now I want to explain the significance of a shift in IQ on a population basis. Okay, this is a very rough drawing of the distribution of IQ across a whole population. It's the so-called normal distribution, the so-called bell-shaped curve. And the thing to note here are the two tails of this curve. Over here, the area under this curve represents all the children in the population that are very bright up to genius level. Okay? And over here, this magenta-covered area is all the children in this population which are mentally handicapped. Below the level, below an IQ of about 70, mentally handicapped. Now, let's imagine that we shift this IQ curve by 5 IQ points, not the 7 mentioned here, but a little bit less, 5 IQ points. Now, the average would go from 100 to 95 in the whole population. Now, here's the point. A parent would not notice the difference between two siblings if you had an IQ of 100, you had an IQ of 95. A teacher in a classroom would not notice the difference between 100 and 95 in the classroom. That's not the point. It's not what you notice with the average person. Look what happens to the tails. You halve the number of geniuses in your society. You halve the number of very bright people in your society, and you double the number of mentally handicapped. That has enormous economic ramifications for this country or any country that fluoridates its water. So right now the promoters of fluoridation are trivializing this issue. It's very significant indeed. Now, a different study was published from China. This one was mentioned in the choice study, but it was not part of the meta-analysis because they did not compare a high fluoride village and a low fluoride village. They used a different approach. They looked at children drinking fluoride, natural fluoride, between 0.24 and 2.84 parts per million. Say between 0.3 and 3 parts per million, rounding it up. 0.3 to 3. That brackets the United States, 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million. Okay, and what did they find? Overall, our study suggested that low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence. Now, how did they measure? What did they do? They measured, in this study, the fluoride levels in the urine of these children. Okay, so they didn't bother about which kid was in which village or whatever. They simply measured the fluoride in the urine, which is a measure, an indirect measure of how much fluoride they are absorbing each day. Okay, so measure the fluoride in the urine. And guess what? What they found was the lower the IQ, the higher the fluoride in the urine, the lower the IQ. So here is the measurement of fluoride in the urine going up and up and up and up and up. And here is the IQ of these children. And that's all done between children drinking 0.3 and 3 parts per million. So now let's consider the weight of evidence. We have over 100 animal studies that show that fluoride damages the brain. Over 10 animal studies shows that fluoride changes animal behavior. Now, this is interesting because if you have an animal study and you see a change in behavior, you can't talk about psychological impacts of watching television or something. These animals are in control. You have this animal that's exposed, this animal is not exposed, and you see a change in behavior. This is the beauty of animal experiments. You can control everything except the thing that you're doing, which is to add the toxic to one and not to the other. A 4th study shows that fluoride damages fetal brain. In China, the families are limited to 1 child per family, so there's a lot of intentional abortions. They've looked at the fetal brains of aborted fetuses, and they compared the ones in high fluoride areas with low fluoride areas, and sure enough, the fetal brains show damage in the high fluoride areas. The 36 studies which show a lowering of IQ, and another 7 human studies showing changes in neurobehavior. That's quite a lot of evidence. That would usually knock out an additive to motor oil. Fluoride and osteosarcoma. In 2001, Dr. Elise Bassin, a dentist, successfully defended her PhD thesis at Harvard. What she did in a careful case-controlled study, she showed that if young boys, not young girls, but if young boys were exposed to fluoridated water in their 6th, 7th, or 8th years, which corresponds to the mid-childhood growth spurt, it's when the bones are growing fast, they had a 5 to 7-fold increased risk in developing osteosarcoma by the age of 20 compared to the non-exposed boys. Now that was a really important finding. At that point it says water fluoridation may be killing because this is frequently fatal, osteosarcoma, frequently fatal, leads to either amputation of legs and arms or death. What happened? Between 2001, Bassin's thesis advisor, a gentleman called Professor Chester Douglas, has 3 times concealed her findings from his peers, from the National Research Council, and from the National Institute of Health. And what he's done over this period is to say, my studies show no relationship between water fluoridation and osteosarcoma, and somehow forgetting to tell the people that he's talking to that his graduate student has found the very opposite of what he's telling. Now, Douglas promotes fluoridation and is also a consultant for Colgate that has some dog in this race. In January 2005, acting on a tip-off, my son, Michael Connett, found Bassin's thesis in the rare book section of one of the Harvard libraries. The Environmental Working Group demanded an investigation of Douglas by the NIH. NIH gives the investigation to Harvard. Harvard, after 1 year, exonerates Douglas of deliberately concealing Bassin's findings. In other words, he didn't deliberately do it. He's a befuddled, confused professor that didn't know he was not telling the public about these findings.
Early Alzheimer's, is that it?
Yeah, I think so. Now, Harvard won't explain their verdict. We spent fruitless months trying to get them to explain their 3-paragraph finding. Well, eventually in 2006, Bassin published her research in the May 2006 issue of the journal. Now, contrasting Douglas's speed at telling the world about her findings, which was like a castrated camel or whatever, a snail pace, immediately she publishes, he sends a letter into the journal saying, wait a moment, my larger study will show that her study does not hold. My larger study will show that Bassin's thesis does not hold. So he promises study, and initially it was promised for the summer of 2006. And we waited, and it didn't get published until 2011. The publication is, for anybody who wants to look it up, it's by Kim and others. It was a lousy study, absolutely atrocious. And the methodology chosen had absolutely no way of discounting Bassin's thesis, because basically their measure of fluoride exposure was not to do what Bassin did, was to calculate for each child how much fluoride they were getting from toothpaste, water, etc., etc., etc. They measured the bone levels of fluoride at autopsy or diagnosis. And there's no way that you can tell what fluoride exposure took place in the 6th, 7th, and 8th years at the time of diagnosis, which could be 16, 17, 18, or death, which could be 25. So just a terrible study, and in no way refuted Bassin's thesis, but that's not the spin that's being put on the issue by the fluoridation lobby. So, let's move to the evidence of benefit is very weak. How much tooth decay would you have to say to justify lowering the IQ of America's children or risking the death of even one child from osteosarcoma? That's a good question to ask any dentist. Incredibly, the evidence of swallowing fluoride actually reduces tooth decay is very, very weak. Now, the National Institute of Dental Research, pro-fluoridation, conducted the largest survey of tooth decay ever undertaken. It cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. They examined the teeth of over 39,000 children in 84 communities. And this is what they found. For children who had always lived their lives in a fluoridated community, they had 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces of the permanent teeth. Now, as far as surfaces are concerned, the top 6 have 4 surfaces, the cutting teeth. The chewing teeth have 5. So on average, between 4 and 5 surfaces per tooth. And overall, by the time all the kids' teeth have come out, they've got 128 tooth surfaces. Now, if you look at the DMFS figures for children who lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, it was 3.4. You subtract 2.8 from 3.4, it's a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. This is what all the angst is about. This is all the millions of dollars being spent by the CDC and other agencies that promote fluoridation and will try to keep it in the water as long as they can, is all about saving 0.6 of one tooth surface. Incredible. Incredible. That's their study. It's not my study. And I should go on to say that the authors did not show that this saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface was statistically significant. Now, we should have been wiser than this. When you see a big government-funded study like this, and the authors don't produce the statistical analysis of the significance of their results, it should have been a red flag to everybody. Well, finally, last year, Kathleen Thiessen, one of the authors of the National Research Council Review, which I should be talking about in a moment, she did the statistical analysis, and she found that this result was not statistically significant. So we have the non-statistically significant saving of 0.6 of one tooth surface as the best that we can get from fluoridated studies. Now, this is a review by David Locker, who's since passed away. The magnitude of fluoridation's effect is not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance. And here is a study done by Bill Osmondson. It wouldn't pass all the criteria for scientific studies, but nonetheless, it's very interesting. What Bill has done here is to put the order of the US states, all 50 of them, in terms of the percentage of the population of those states drinking fluoridated water. Okay? And then that data is from the CDC. And then he got another set of data from the the NIH, which was a national survey of children's health. And they administered questionnaires in each state. So we have 50 questionnaires here, okay? 50 separate questionnaires. And one of the questions on the questionnaire was, does your child have very good or excellent teeth? Very good or excellent teeth. And what you're now going to see is the answer, yes, my child has very good or excellent teeth in low-income families. Now you see that the line is very noisy, but it's essentially flat. Now, if there was a strong relationship between drinking fluoridated water and the quality of teeth, wouldn't you anticipate that the fewer numbers of yes would be at this point, and the greatest numbers of yes would be at this point? That's what you would expect. You would see some kind of curve running parallel to that. Well, now look at the answer yes to families of high income. And there it's incredibly flat and consistent, hovering about 80%. So there is a relationship on that board which is very significant. There's a very strong relationship between tooth decay and income levels. And if you don't control very, very carefully for that, and many of these studies which promote fluoridation have not, you can get any result that you want. Okay? And if you're interested, I can show you an example from New York State where the data was outrageously selected to support the attempt to fluoridate one county. There we have it. So if there's a relationship between fluoridation and tooth decay, it's not very strong. It's certainly not as strong as the relationship between income levels. And another interesting piece of information is that certain communities over the last 10 years or so have stopped fluoridation. In former East Germany, when the two countries came together, Cuba, 1 community. Canada, in British Columbia, and Finland, 1 town stopped fluoridation. And in every one of these cases, after the cessation of fluoridation, tooth decay did not go up, which is what they anticipated. And these studies were conducted by pro-fluoridation researchers. A recent important study from Iowa. Did you know that Iowa University, whatever the university is, receives millions of dollars of US government funding to do the famous Iowa study? They're looking at kids over a lifetime to see the effects of fluoride. Well, they looked at children for 9 years. For 9 years. And what they did in this study, which had never been done before, this is a study with a co-author, Stephen Levy, who refused to debate me, which is unfortunate. But anyway, this study measured tooth decay as a function of individual fluoride exposure. They calculated for each of these children for 9 years how much fluoride they were taking into their bodies over each day for 9 years. And lo and behold, they found no relationship between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride ingested. And yet these guys still promote fluoridation. Stephen Levy does. Even though his own study is strong evidence that it doesn't work. And this is an exact quote from that paper. These findings suggest that achieving a caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake, while fluorosis is clearly more dependent on fluoride intake. Now, I don't understand. Perhaps you can help me here. How can you state something like that and then continue, like Stephen Levy, to promote fluoridation? If there's no relationship between the amount of fluoride that you swallow and put into your body and tooth decay, then why do you support it? Well, I've got a simple answer. It's rather cynical, because in order to keep the money flowing in from the US health authorities, he has to continue to promote fluoridation. That's the cynical explanation. So he can find everything. He's honest. He publishes the honest results, but then his conclusions for public consumption is that fluoridation is fine and dandy. So now it's time, I think, to talk about dental fluorosis. In November of 2010, the CDC published fluorosis data for the whole of the United States. And this is what they found, that 41%, I've given you the figure before, but I want you to see the breakdown. 41% of American children aged 12 to 15 had some form of dental fluorosis. 28.5% had very mild, 8.6% had mild, and 3.6% had either moderate or severe. Now these names are a little misleading because I want to show you what this dental fluorosis actually looks like. So this is very mild dental fluorosis. This impacts up to 25% of the tooth surface. At one end of the spectrum, it's little white spots on the cusp of the teeth, and at the other end of the spectrum, the worst cases of very mild is this, where 25% of the tooth surface is impacted. And mild, and this impacts 8.6% of American kids between 12 and 15 have up to 50% of the enamel impacted. And moderate and severe looks like this, where 100% of the tooth enamel is impacted, and that impacts 3.6% of American children between 12 and 15. And believe me, children that have this condition do not like to smile, do not like to smile when they go to school, do not like to smile on their first date because they know it puts their boyfriends and peers off when they do. People immediately assume that these kids are not looking after their teeth. So think of the psychological damage to a teenager entailed by this. So I now want to talk about the story of two relationships. A little bit of history here, for those who like history. The father of fluoridation was Trenley Dean of the US Public Health Service. And he published this famous 21-city study in 1942. And this study purports to show that as the level of fluoride in the water goes up, the tooth decay in these 21 cities go down. So there's 21 dots there representing 21 cities. And this is the graph which launched fluoridation. But wait a moment. A number of scientists, including Ziegelbecker from Austria, said, wait a moment, why did he only use 21 cities? He had data from hundreds of cities. Why didn't he use all the data? And what Ziegelbecker proceeded to do was to plot the results if you put in all the data points that he could find in America and in Europe, and now it's completely flat. There is no relationship between the level of fluoride in the drinking water and dental decay. No, it disappears. Relationship disappears. Now, did Dean do this deliberately or not? I don't know. But now look at the other relationship. He does the same thing for dental fluorosis. And here you see a very clear relationship. The more fluoride in the water, the more dental fluorosis that you have. So one relationship is very robust, very strong, the relationship between fluoride and dental fluorosis. The other relationship between fluoride absorption in the water and tooth decay is very weak. Now, that's data from 1981. Let's look at data from that National Dental Research study I told you about. Okay, here's the level of fluoride in the water, okay? The first bunch of data is for communities less than 0.3. The second one is between 0.3 and 0.7. Next one is 0.7 to 1.2. That's the artificial fluoridation. And then greater than 1.2. Look at the relationship with dental fluorosis. Very clear. 14.6, 19.6, 25.2, 40.5% of the children impacted. Now look at the relationship with dental decay. 55.5, 54.6, 54.4, 56.4. Negligible differences in tooth decay. One relationship is robust, the other is extremely weak. But it's that weak relationship which has been used to promote fluoridation. Other health concerns, I've got to be quick now because I notice I'm now 5 minutes over, so let me try to get the rest done in 5 minutes. The National Research Council report produced a groundbreaking report in 2006. It was groundbreaking because the first time ever they used a balanced panel, not a panel selected to produce a self-fulfilling prophecy of pro-fluoridation experts, but a panel of balance. They had 3 pro-fluoridation, 3 anti-fluoridation, and 6 uncommitted scientists on this panel. It took them 3.5 years, and their final report was 507 pages with 1,100 references. It is the most comprehensive look at fluoride toxicology ever undertaken. The fluoridation promoters have done their best to downplay or completely ignore this report. On the day it was published, the ADA, the American Dental Association, declared that it was irrelevant to water fluoridation, erroneously claiming that the NRC panel concerned itself only with water containing fluoride at 4 parts per million. 6 days later, Tweedledum said the same thing. The Oral Health Division, CDC, declared the findings of the NRC report are consistent with CDC's assessment that water is safe and healthy at the levels used for water fluoridation. Poppycock! Absolute poppycock. If you look at that report, Chapter 2 is an exposure analysis. And in that exposure analysis, they concluded that certain subsets of the population were exceeding the EPA's safe reference dose for fluoride of 0.06 milligrams per kilogram per day. That's the Irish level. Drinking fluoridated water at 1 part per million. And those subsets of the population included bottle-fed babies and high water drinkers and people with kidney dysfunction. Now, what's interesting here, if that's true, that 0.06 is based upon a level to protect against dental fluorosis. But the ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, had a lower level to protect against bone fractures, 0.05. So if that was the case, exceeded 0.06. Obviously, it exceeded the levels at which they felt was necessary to protect bones. Now, elsewhere in this thing, this is the conclusion on this. They have a whole chapter on the brain. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with functions of the brain. Several lines of information indicate an effect of fluoride exposure on thyroid function. The chairman of the panel, Dr. John Dool, in the interview with Scientific American, he said, "The thyroid changes do worry me. There are some things that need to be explored." Chapter 5 dealt with the bone, and all members of the committee agreed that there is scientific evidence that under certain conditions, fluoride can weaken bone and increase the risk of fractures. Now, a study from Mexico, they showed that there was a very strong correlation between the severity of dental fluorosis in children and bone fractures in both children and adults. And this effect is being noticed between no dental fluorosis and very mild dental fluorosis. The methodology of that study has been challenged, but no attempt has been made in any fluoridated country to reproduce that study, nor, more importantly, to use this technique of using the severity of dental fluorosis as a biomarker of exposure, which would be a wonderful thing to do with many childhood concerns. There was a study published in China by an American group, Li et al., looking at hip fracture rates in 6 villages of increasing fluoride concentration. Village 3 was about 1 part per million. And you'll see that at this level, between 1.5 and 2.9 parts per million, the hip fracture rates doubled. Slightly decreased for the next village and tripled at village 6. Now, what has happened here is that people have said this is the only statistically significant result, therefore you can ignore those other 2 data points. But we plotted them out, and we reckon, I think it's reasonable, that what we're looking at here is a linear trend. And although the hip fracture rates that doubled here may not be statistically significant, but they seem to be part of a trend. And by the way, it is on the basis of this study by Lee and others that the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry came up with that standard of 0.05. And to add irony to irony, ATSDR is a part of the Center of Disease Control. So the Center of Disease Control, who said that this report was irrelevant to water fluoridation, their own scientists in the Center of Disease Control were saying essentially that people are exceeding the safe reference dose. This is what John Dool said after this review. The chairman of the NRC report. What the committee found is that we've gone with the status quo regarding fluoride for many years, for too long really, and now we need to take a fresh look. In the scientific community, people tend to think this is settled. I mean, when the US Surgeon General comes out and says this is one of the top 10 greatest achievements of the 20th century, that's a hard hurdle to get over. But when we looked at the studies that have been done, we found that many of these questions are unsettled, and we have much less information than we should, considering how long this fluoridation has been going on. In other words, you're clearly looking at an experiment that's been conducted on the American population for over 60 years. I will save this discussion of the lousy science that's not been done, the science that's not been done in this country till tomorrow as part of the spin stuff. And I think I'll stop there for questions, but when you've asked a few questions, I want to, before the end, talk about what we can do to end this nonsense, but more of that tomorrow. So let's go into questions. I'm sorry I'm 10 minutes over. Yes, at the back.
Yeah, does a carbon block water filter, will that take out the fluoride, or what is our best source of taking the fluoride out of the water?
Good question. Okay, the cheap filters, the carbon filters, the aqua
Brita filters do not remove fluoride. To remove fluoride, there's several techniques. You could use distillation. You can use reverse osmosis. But if you use reverse osmosis, make sure you have the water tested because they're not consistent. Some do, some don't. Some do it well, some do it badly, depending on flow rate. Another one that I particularly like from that I've seen in Australia and live with is ion exchange, where you have a cation exchange and an anion exchange, and you get pretty good water. It's very fast, and the beauty of the system is the moment that the ions start to come through, the conductivity goes up, and you know you've got to change the cartridge. So a mixture of cation and anion exchanges, and lastly, much cheaper. In California, they are marketing a filter made of bone char. Bone attracts fluoride. So if you get charred bone, it will absorb the fluoride. And I think they use alumina as well. All of these systems are expensive, and they don't protect you when you go downtown and have a meal. They don't protect you when you're at work, and they don't protect you when you're at a friend's house. So really, the only way to protect yourself is to organize politically to get this nonsense out. And I would say this. This is, of all the environmental health issues, this is the easiest one to end. All you need is a strong wrist. Just turn off the spigot at the waterworks, and it's over. That's it. Tell me any other environmental health issue that you can end by turning off a answer, because this is something that we're doing to ourselves, unnecessarily poisoning ourselves with this stuff. So you can stop it. You can stop it tomorrow if you get the political will. But to get the political will, you need masses of people educated and organized. And that's what this meeting is about. It's the beginning of an educational process, and hopefully the beginning of an organization process. We have to organize to apply that 2 by 2 to the politician's head. Yes?
Is there a correlation between low iodine levels and low IQ and fluoride causing maybe not being able to fluoride iodine?
Yes, there is a strange relationship which nobody has really clarified yet between a mixture of fluoride and iodine, a mixture of moderately high fluoride and low borderline iodine. The fluoride seems to make the problem of low borderline iodine worse. So in one study in China, they found a lowering of IQ in children at 0.88 parts per million of fluoride in children with borderline iodine deficiency. And that was that lowering of IQ was significantly lower than higher levels of fluoride with reasonable amounts of iodine. And we don't know the mechanism, how fluoride interferes with the thyroid function, but we're pretty certain it does, because doctors used to use fluoride to lower thyroid function in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Argentina, France, and Germany. And the doses they used were pretty small. And there was a study done in the Ukraine in 1985 where they showed effect on thyroid function at 2.3 parts per million of fluoride in the water. And the outrageous thing is that even though whilst we have millions of people in the United States, particularly women, with low thyroid function, there's never been any attempt to see if this epidemic of hypothyroidism is in any way related to fluoridation status, fluoride exposure. Outrageous. And that's true of many other basic health concerns, which the literature should say. The literature of both animal studies and studies done in India and China should, waving these red flags, should say, you should do this study. You should do this study in the United States. They're not doing these studies in the United States. They're not doing them in Canada. They're not doing them in Ireland. They're not doing them in England. They're not doing them in Australia. They're not doing them in New Zealand. They're not doing it in any fluoridated country. The most basic things they're not doing. Yes?
Why is the case against fluoride that met with so much more opposition than like asbestos or lead in commercial paints, stuff like that?
Okay. I'll tell you, there's a very simple answer to that. The asbestos promoters came in black hats. They were industry, money-grabbing industry. The promoters of fluoridation come in white coats. They are respectable dentists and doctors and AMAs and ADAs. And they have government power behind them, so much different. We love to go after industry, but we're not so good at going after these respectable outfits. Yes?
Why does the ADA promote it when you would think it'd be counter to their business, because less caries is less business?
Yeah, well,
Plus,
that's if you...
How do you also pronounce Van Gogh?
Okay. Van Gogh. Gogh. Ask the doctor. Gogh. You say Van Gogh. Oh, dreadful. Okay. The ADA has its seal of approval on every dental product that contains fluoride. It's the ADA telling this of huge industry which sells toothpaste, mouthwash all over the planet. They have their imprimatur on it. And I suspect that when the lawsuits begin, when they finally nail down a little bit more than dental fluorosis, who's going to be sued? It's going to be the toothpaste manufacturers. It's going to be the ADA, who told everybody it was okay. So I think right now the toothpaste manufacturers hide behind the cloak of the ADA, and the ADA is hiding behind the authority of the CDC. They work in tandem. Yeah.
Is there any health risk to bathing in fluoridated water?
Good question. Some people, there is rumored to be a study which shows that fluoride is absorbed in a hot bath. If you have a hot bath, the pores open, and obviously the fluoride can't go through the skin, the waxy layers of the skin, but maybe in a hot bath when the pores open, the fluoride can go in. I've met a woman in Florida, this is anecdotal, who showed me pictures, bright colored photographs of what she looked like after she had a shower. And her great big red blotches under her arms, on her chest, and so on. And she said, I went to doctor after doctor trying to solve this problem. And I got all kinds of ointments, all kinds of medication. Nothing worked. And then one day someone said to me, is your water fluoridated? She says, I don't know. And then she found out the water was fluoridated. So then she started having showers in a non-fluoridated community. I don't know how she worked that, but she did. And no problem. So this suggests to me, at least for this one individual, that fluoride, even in a shower, could get through and impact whatever produces this rosy coloration. Yes?
In a lot of situations they talk about the resistance to change being follow the money.
Yes.
Like who is benefiting from the bad science?
Okay. There's a lot of candidates for this, and the last chapter in our book was trying to conjecture as to why. Why are they pushing so hard and continue to push so hard? Even as the science gets worse and worse and worse, from their point of view, they push harder and harder. Why? Well, 1 year before the US Public Health Service mysteriously endorsed fluoridation in 1950, before any of the trials had been completed, and before there was any significant health studies on any community, the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation, 1950. 1 year before that, the US Sugar Lobby, in its newsletter said, and this is the Sugar Research Foundation, which represented 133 sugar interests, from candy to cornflakes to sugar itself, said we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. Then the sugar industry proceeded to fund professors at prestigious universities, nutrition departments, to go out around the country and to testify before Congress that sugar was a nutritious meal, that Coca-Cola was nutritious drink, and cookies, etc., were excellent nutrition. And these same people also promoted fluoridation. So they put the two together, pro-sugar, pro-fluoridation. And the classic example is Dr. Frederick Steyer, who earned millions of dollars, was the chairman of the nutrition department at Harvard University. And no one was more aggressive in the promotion of fluoridation than Fred Steyer. And nobody was more nasty to people opposed to fluoridation than Fred Steyer, who had like a weekly newspaper article. And another thing that Fred Stair did is he attacked Rachel Carson when she published Silent Spring. He was also a member of the American Council on Science and Health, which is an industry-funded front that's never found a chemical that they didn't like. And they are still in action today, extolling the virtues of fluoridation and attacking anybody like Peter Vallone Jr., a councilman in New York City, had the audacity to recommend that they stop fluoridation in New York City. You wouldn't believe the language, the rhetoric that the ACSH delivered at Peter Vallone for suggesting that. So this American Council of Science and Health is funded by, you name it, the oil companies, the chemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry. So you've got a lot to choose from there. Christopher Bright, sorry, this is an important question. Christopher Bright wrote a brilliant book, The Fluoride Deception. And if you want to save time, I did a 28-minute interview with Chris Bryson shortly after he wrote this book, explaining that the beginning of fluoridation was precipitated by the industries that produced fluoride as a pollutant, that were facing many lawsuits from farmers for the damage to their crops. And his thesis is that they wanted to change the image of fluoride from, at that time, the worst air pollutant in the United States, the pollutant that had damaged more agriculture than any other air pollutant, according to the US Department of Agriculture, said that. So they wanted to change the image of fluoride from nasty air pollutant to the stuff that's safe enough to put in your cornflakes, etc. And an interesting thing is, there were 3 different groups that discovered that fluoride caused dental fluorosis, 1931. And one of the researchers was H.V. Churchill, who was the chief researcher, chemist for Alcoa. And he found that fluoride caused dental fluorosis. In Chris Bryson's book, it says that Churchill phones up dentists in Messina, which has a large aluminum smelter, Alcoa smelter, to see if there are cases of dental fluorosis in the children. And the answer was there were in Messina. What was the level in fluoride in the water in Messina? Very low. In other words, he knew, Alcoa knew, in 1931 that fluoride air pollution from aluminum smelters caused dental fluorosis. And what could be worse for an industry to have a telltale biomarker of exposure to a nasty pollutant than that? So you can see it with the naked eye. You can see dental fluorosis. So if you see dental fluorosis amongst children, you say, well, where's the fluoride coming from? In those days, you look around for an aluminum smelter, a phosphate fertilizer plant, a steel industry, ceramics. You'd look for some industrial source. We don't do that anymore. And let me throw this out, and hopefully you won't immediately say I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? Because I'm not. But it's interesting. Is it feasible? Is it possibly feasible that if you're an industry and you're scared stiff that dental fluorosis is going to indicate you as the culprit, and that in addition to dental fluorosis, it's immediately also discovered sometime in the future that it's damaging bone and doing other serious things, not only to farmers and their animals, but also to your own workers? What's one thing you might consider? Fluoridate as much of the water supply as you possibly can, because if you do that, you can never point to an industrial source. Interesting, eh? Interesting thought. I'm not saying it's true. Yeah.
Question and a comment on the floss and the rinse. Is that as bad as the drinking water?
The what?
Dental floss that has fluoride and the rinse that has fluoride. Is that just dental rinse? Is that as bad as the drinking water?
Well, if you drink the mouthwash, yes. The mouthwash is 500 parts per million. You drink that.
You don't swallow it, you're okay?
You don't. I wouldn't, because when you're swishing, that's not only swishing around your teeth. Some of it's going through the gums. And so, especially if your child before your permanent teeth have come out, then you're going to increase your risk of
Same
death.
thing with dental floss is no good either.
Dental floss, I'm not sure just how much fluoride would be imparted with dental
And
floss.
then also, I have one more comment. I have a dentist that for years, there's been patients that do not get fluoride treatments when they clean their teeth.
Didn't?
Do not.
Yeah, well that's good. Find those dentists. There are quite
They
a...
would charge you for for fluoride treatment in your insurance if you do use it. But there's been patients, I quit using it because I had a friend that used to be a nurse and said that fluoride was poison.
Yeah.
So he does not do a fluoride treatment when I have my teeth cleaned.
Let me answer a question before it's asked. If you ask me the question, which would I prefer, fluoride added to water or the use of fluoridated toothpaste? There's no question that I would opt for fluoridated toothpaste over water fluoridation. Now, if you ask me a second question, is do you use fluoridated toothpaste? And my answer is I haven't used fluoridated toothpaste for 16 years. Since I've seen how nasty fluoride is, I don't want any near my body whatsoever. So the first order of business is get the fluoride out of the water. But before everybody jumps into the frying pan, we also need to get rid of fluoridated toothpaste, or at least make sure that people are warned about it. Yes, oh no, you've answered, yes.
Okay, isn't it logical to assume that, like, the fluoride that we consume is not just, it's in our water, but anything that is produced with that water, that the foods that we consume, the plants that are grown with possibly fluoridated water, are we consuming it and with, anything else that we're eating, like?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, there are foods which are naturally high in fluoride. You have tea, naturally high, grows well in fluoridated soils. You have bones, any food that has bones. So fish bones, high in fluoride, animal bones, chicken bones. Do not eat mechanically deboned meat. Try to stick to the whole meat, whole chickens, not chicken patties and so on. Okay, so that's a natural source. Then in addition to that, you've got fluoride pesticides and you've got fluoride in fertilizers. So try to stick to organic food. If you can afford organic food, to eliminate the fluoride that way. But you're right, if a community is making up fruit juice and using water to dilute it, then it's going to have a high level. So fruit juice is high. If you have Coca-Cola companies, if you have beer companies in communities which are fluoridated, you're going to get about 1 part per million in those products, unless the company itself removes the fluoride with some reverse osmosis systems. You have to check with each company, or you have to get it measured. And also processed food. If you process food, it absorbs water, and yes. As far as the fluoride, my wife's a very keen organic gardener. So she was appalled to know that she's watering her garden with fluoridated water. But the uptake of fluoride into plants is very, it's not consistent. Some plants take it up, some plants don't. And also it depends upon the soil. Some soil hold on to it, some soils do not hold on to it. So there's no clear-cut answer to that, or no simple answer to that question. The US Department of Agriculture does publish a whole list of foodstuffs and the average level of fluoride in those foodstuffs, and you can calculate your exposure using that. Yeah?
Doctors always tell the patients who smoke, if you go on and smoke in 10, 20 years, if you stop completely, your body will recover and you'll be back, your lungs will be back to how it was as a non-smoker. Is there any such action with fluoride? I've been drinking fluoride water for 60 years. Is the damage done for me? That's what I'm saying.
The answer is probably most of it has been done, but the good news is that the fluoride that's in your bones will turn over, or at least some of it. Some of the fluoride, if it works deep into the bones, you've got it for a long time. But the fluoride that's going to the surface layers of the bone will come off. So if you stop the source of fluoride, the fluoride levels in your bones will come down. So the sooner you stop the sources of fluoride, the better it is for you. Yeah?
I think that any book on nutrition I've ever read says that fluoride is needed for hydroxyapatite in bone. Is that false?
That's false. There's no indication, well, this is, They claim that there are some studies that indicate that fluoride, in addition to hardening the enamel, may strengthen the bone. But if that's the case, it's only up to a modest level. So if you have a strengthening of the bone, after a certain point, it then begins to weaken the bone and make the bones more brittle over time. So
are the recommended levels now, are those levels safe? I couldn't give you those numbers off the top.
You can't say what's a safe level based upon concentration. The nearest we can get to it is to talk about safe doses. How many milligrams a day could cause bone fractures in it? And something I haven't mentioned, before you get to bone fractures, the first symptoms of fluoride's poisoning of the bone is just like arthritis. The symptoms are just like arthritis. They are a stiffness of the joints, pains in the joints, pains in the bone themselves. These are the first symptoms, very definitely documented extensively in India and China. We have millions of people with arthritis in this country, and again, no health authority is looking to see if there's a relationship between how much fluoride you're exposed to over a lifetime and whether or not that causes or exacerbates arthritis. Not doing it. Yes, behind.
You spoke of arthritis.
What's that?
Arthritis.
Arthritis, yeah.
The Latin word means pain in joints. Am I correct?
Pain in the joints, yes.
The arthritis, the Latin word means pain in the joints. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and those are the first symptoms that you get with skeletal fluorosis.
I have a question. What would be the best water on the market that you know of to be safe to drink? The best water on the market to be safe to drink?
Well, if you want to be absolutely safe, you should get distilled water. But please, if you do that, make sure you couple it with the nutrients. Right now, I'm living off reverse osmosis water, and I'm not happy about it, because I know every time I drink reverse osmosis water, I'm not getting the calcium and magnesium that I would normally get from most drinking water systems. So basically, if you're going to go that route, either distilled water or reverse osmosis water, make sure you're eating the right diet, lots of vegetables, a lot of green vegetables to get those minerals. And I'm sure most books in nutrition will tell you which vegetables, etc., you need to eat to get these things. Or if that's too difficult, then make sure you take the mineral supplements. What we need in a health store is somebody to produce a packet of minerals that says, this packet of minerals is designed for people that are not drinking tap water, but drinking distilled water or reverse osmosis water. What?
You can buy that.
Yeah, little packets of stuff?
Well, actually bottles, it comes in liquid form.
Oh, okay.
So many drops in a gallon.
Excellent, there we go, that's it. Okay, I'm glad that...
We mineralize your reverse osmosis.
Excellent, well I'm glad to hear that. That's the way to go then. That's a secure way to go. The other way is to, in Europe and Canada, the bottled water is a requirement to have all the mineral levels in it. All the metal ions, all the negative ions in it. Same in Europe. Europe and Canada, yes. United States, no. There's no requirement to say what minerals are in that bottle of water. You can call the 800 number and ask them. And more people should. Yes, I want to make sure that everybody's answered the question first before we go to the ones asking second.
Have you heard of a machine from China? I believe it's called Kangen. Kangen water?
From Japan.
From Japan?
Kangen. It's an island.
No, I haven't heard of that.
Okay.
Medical instrument for
Yeah.
producing.
Right.
All I urge you, please, is not simply to protect yourself, but to protect the whole community by getting this fluoride out. Yes?
My question would be, once we worry about the fluoride and the distilled water, what about the containers we're keeping this in? Should we keep it in glass? Should we buy distilled in plastic bisphenol A bottle?
Another good question, because there's a great deal of concern about bisphenol A leaching out of plastics. The big blue containers, I think, are polycarbonate. I'm not sure if there has bisphenol A in it or not. But yes, if you're concerned about that, use glass, but then it's heavy. Those big glass containers are heavy. And now we're back in, you know, we got fluoride out of Canton, New York. Took us 7.5 years. It was so wonderful to be able to drink the tap water. Now we moved to Binghamton, New York, and it's fluoridated again. So we're back to this business of going to the big superstores and bringing back all these containers of reverse osmosis water. It's a pain in the butt, and it would be even more painful if they were made of glass. So I think it's better to, again, check with somebody that's into this and see what the right container to get, which gives you water but doesn't give you plastic additives as well. Anybody that hasn't asked a question? Yes, you.
Testing, you mentioned that some reverse osmosis systems take out the fluoride and some don't. Is there an inexpensive, reliable that we
No.
send it into?
Oh, you could send it into, you could try to find a laboratory that does the testing and send them in a sample. Shouldn't cost you more than about $25. The only reason that I know about that reverse osmosis is there's a chemist in San Diego called Richard Sauerhaber. He teaches at a community college there. And he's been testing all the equipment himself, setting it up and measuring the fluoride in the water before and afterwards. And he was the one that told me it depends upon the flow rate, the model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I was fortunate my house that I bought came with a reverse osmosis system. But then my other question is, for my shower, is there a filter that you recommend to, so I'm not standing in the sun?
I think they exist. I've never used
Don't
one.
know which one. Does anybody here know what they suggest?
Well, I have one at home, but I can't recall.
Okay.
Hey, this brings up a point. You know, the reason, when you push it, the most emotive argument for promoting fluoridation is that this is supposed to help poor kids, poor families, where the most tooth decay is concentrated. But in my view, that's a really pernicious doctrine, because it's precisely the poor families that cannot do what we're talking about. They cannot afford all these avoidance measures. They have to drink it. And also, we know that fluoride is most toxic if you've got poor nutrition. If you've got low calcium, low vitamins, low protein, that's where fluoride strikes hardest. And where are you likely to find poor nutrition in the United States? Answer, in low-income families. So they are being targeted for fluoridation, and yet they are the most vulnerable, and they can't avoid it. It's not equitable at all.
Let's take two more questions.
Two more
from
questions.
People, and I want to do some house cleaning before
Yes.
we wrap up.
Yes,
right?
yes.
You mentioned one of the studies they took urine analysis, and
Yes.
that's where they found the fluoride.
Yeah.
Is that common? I mean, is there?
Oh, yes.
Is there, you talked about the white coats.
Yeah.
When we go back to the white coats, if we're going to the doctor, we're saying every time that we want to be tested and see what our, in our urologyst, I want to see what my fluoride level is.
As far as I can
bring
know.
it back to them and bring it back to them. And
Yeah, I think it's good. As far as I know, there is nowhere that there's any kind of comprehensive testing of fluoride in urine. There's no one doing it. In fact, there's no comprehensive monitoring of the fluoride levels in our bones, in our blood, or in our urine. At this point, we should have millions of data points. We have practically none. But there's nothing to stop you asking, if you have a urine test, what the levels of fluoride are in your urine. When they did this with thousands of people in England, they were amazed at how high the levels were in the urine. And the rule of thumb is about 50% of the fluoride that you take in each day is excreted in the urine. And so you've got a rough measure of how much fluoride is coming into your body when you measure the fluoride in your urine. So yes, ask your doctor for that measure. But doctors you see, this is one of the problems. When you put a subject off the radar screen, when you tell medical students there is no debate on fluoridation, it's perfectly safe, it's not toxic, no problem, then doctors are not being trained to recognize the toxic effects of fluoride, especially for sensitive people. They're not being trained to recognize that we should be measuring the fluoride in the urine. It's very dangerous when politics interferes with science, especially science which is supposed to be determining health policy. That lady with the baby, very important.
Is there any difference between artificially added fluoride and naturally occurring fluoride?
Oh, that is a $64,000 question, and it's not easy to answer. The simplest answer is what I gave you. The industrial grade fluoride is contaminated. It has arsenic in it. The natural fluoride doesn't have that, not typically. Normally, when you find fluoride naturally occurring, it's usually accompanied with high levels of calcium, maybe 100 times level and higher than the fluoride. That calcium is, to a certain extent, protective against fluoride's toxicity for the simple reason, if you have a lot of calcium and fluoride together, it's not so easy to take it up into the bloodstream. And so a lot of that fluoride ends up in the feces, goes straight through the system if you have a lot of calcium with it. So there is a case where the certain natural fluorides are safer because there's a lot of calcium there. But I have to agree with the industry up to a point when they argue that by the time you've diluted this 23% solution of hexafluorosilicic acid, 180,000 to 1, that this complex of silicon and fluoride breaks down to free fluoride ion and hydrogen ions. And if you neutralize it with sodium hydroxide, what you then have is essentially hydrated silica and a solution of sodium fluoride. And at this point, there shouldn't be a difference between this fluoride solution and something that you've made up with sodium fluoride, etc. However, there is one little caveat on that. The study which showed complete dissociation of this hexafluorosilicic acid with dilution made it clear that it was pH dependent. And below a pH of about 4, there was a persistent silicon fluoride complex, which would then be different from the fluoride that's being tested in animal studies, etc. The sodium fluoride that's tested. This silicon fluoride complex will be different and may have different biological properties. But the pH of water is about 7 to 8, it's usually slightly alkaline, so it shouldn't be there. However, what happens when the hydrated silica and the fluoride hits the stomach? The stomach has a pH between 1 and 2. Will it not recombine to form this silicon pentafluoride complex, and would we then not be dealing with a different species from the one that's being tested, the sodium fluoride? And also, how much association would you have in carbonated drinks, acid drinks? I doubt if the pH level goes. Anybody know what the pH of carbonated drinks is? I should know. I suspect it's not much lower than 5. So to me, the bigger issue is that if you use industrial grade hexafluorosilicic acid, you're going to get arsenic, and that's a known carcinogen. You should not be putting that in the drinking water.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, some quick takeaways in case some of you have to take off. There will be a meeting here January 28th, 2 weeks from today, from 6 to 8 p.m. in this library. I'm not sure it's going to be this specific room. Is it this room? Do we know yet?
No, it isn't yet.
We don't know yet, but you'll see it downstairs from 6 to 8 p.m., January 28th. And the intention of the meeting is to start coordinating a grassroots effort to create some change here where we live. Just hold on 1 second, please, all right? So the quick update on what the status is in Scott County, and I apologize for those of you from Illinois that are here. I don't have enough knowledge about the Illinois side of the river yet. But that is that we essentially have everybody pointing fingers to everybody else. The water company tells us that it's the municipality's concern and jurisdiction. And if you go to havethedebate.com, the website, you can see there's a high-res scan of the one-page document from 1952, which is the original enacting contract between the Iowa Department of Health, the City of Davenport, and the Iowa Water Company. That's what it was known as back then. So there were 3 parties to the matter in Scott County at this point, technically and legally. However, the water company says, well, now we fluoridate all these other municipalities in Scott County too, so for us to stop, you got to get them all on the same page. Sorry, it's their problem now. Then when you go to the city, in 2007, Tom Warner, the city attorney, wrote a memo that articulated that, hey, it's not our problem, it's the DNR's problem. It's the state's problem. You need to lobby the state. And recently, Mike Angelos was talking to the DNR via email, and they put in writing, sorry, it's not our problem, it's the water company's problem. So we have a perfect circle of just denial that they are actually engaged. Now, with Paul's help, what we're going to do by the time he leaves Wednesday morning is we're going to have a series of hard questions that need to be answered. And the purpose of that meeting on the 28th is to get people assembled to say, okay, you live in Bettendorf, here's 10 questions that need to be asked and answered, and we need 10 people at public business at the Bettendorf Council meeting, so those 10 questions get asked. We have repetition, we have bodies, it's not just one person, it's a lot of people. The same thing needs to happen in Davenport as well. That's going to be the purpose of that meeting on January 28th, is to line that up. It's, you know, and we need more people on the track, folks. We need more people engaged in this process. And if we can't take control of what's in our water supply where we live, the power of the wrist, I'm going to steal that from you, by the way. That's really good. I mean, that's it. That's all, this is all we have to do. Yeah. It's an amazing opportunity to actually do some environmental good here. So that's practice. Yeah, just turn it off. Another small piece of housekeeping. Super Liberty is a local group of activists that got this together. We have a health freedom forum that we started and so forth. Superliberty.com. You can check that out. We've covered the hard costs for Dr. Connett to be here. We'd like to send him home with a great donation from the Quad Cities for his efforts. To that point, we have
to the Fluoride, not to me personally.
Yes, to the Fluoride Action Network, yeah. to his organization. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen fluoridealert.org, the website, check it out. It's a phenomenal website. It's extremely resourceful. There's videos of pediatricians who are talking. I mean, he's got all this. Yeah.
I want to give these away.
Yeah.
Okay. I want anybody that is going to put this on their car and not their refrigerator, please feel free to take one of these. And this is the hard copy of the Professional Perspectives on Water Fluoridation. If you haven't seen this, this is the best we've got. This is the most powerful tool. It's 15 scientists, including Arvid Carlson, who you heard about, 3 members of the National Research Council, 2 former employees of the EPA, former dentists who formerly supported fluoridation have now switched over, explaining why fluoridation is a bad idea. Here's what I recommend. Get one of these and make as many copies as you can. Just find somebody young, they know how to do it. Make as many copies as you can and give them to your friends. It's so unintrusive. In the privacy of your own home, you can look at this. You might even try your dentists and doctors with this. So,
better yet, give it to your city council person.
Yeah.
All right, and ask them to watch it.
So, bumper sticker on your car, DVD to make copies with, and the jackpot is if anyone here can get it on public access television.
Yes,
you
good call.
Okay.
So hold on 1 second. Hold on. So Steve has the donation jar over there. He's going to put it on the back shelf back there. You can make a check out to Fluoride Action Network, cash, or you can go to fluoridealert.org. And you can, help support. We want to send him back with a great contribution to his organization. Now,
do you have books for sale here?
No. Nearly last on order, and thank you for your patience this evening, is grab this blue flyer, grab a handful of them on your way out. It says, how can I get involved? It has some suggestions. It also lists emails for the Scott County Board of Supervisors, Eldridge, LeClaire, Davenport, and Bettendorf. Again, we need an Illinois leader to do the same thing in Illinois. Tomorrow night at 6:30 at the Moline Public Library is the next presentation. And HaveTheDebate.com is a website. You can go info@HaveTheDebate.com to get on an email list. Thank you for coming.
Let me get these loose out.
John, we'll have more people. Get a copy of this. I want to say one thing to
We'll find out. No.
Yes, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
We see it, we grab it.
Well, good.
Love it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Keep it up.
Thank you.